My roommate Dave's got this poster stuck to his wall. It's kind of funny. It says, "Welcome to the party," with various communist historical figures wearing party hats and partying. I can see why somebody would get a kick out of it. And I don't want to be too much of a killjoy, but the people on this poster are some of the worst mass murderers in human history. So I asked Dave if he would hang up a fascist equivalent. You know, a "Welcome to the Party" poster, with images of a partying Hitler, maybe some other Nazi party members, maybe Mussolini's in there. And he said he wouldn't. Well, why not? It's the same joke. They're all genocidal tyrants, so why the communists, but not the Nazis? In much the same vein, Nazi art collectors generally have to tread carefully, while Soviet art collectors don't really have to worry about it so much. In fact, Jordan Peterson, who has an extensive Soviet art collection, acknowledged the hypocrisy in displaying communist propaganda in his house, but refusing to display its Nazi equivalent. Why is the swastika considered near universally offensive, if the hammer and sickle is still relatively innocuous? When you see some idiot with a swastika in public, the average person's mind immediately snaps to, "This guy's a proponent of genocide." But when Antifa types carry around communist iconography, nobody bats an eye. At best, people just side-eye them a bit and carry on. You might make the argument that as bad as communism is, it's just more tolerable than fascism. That a position on the extreme right is always going to be worse than the equally extreme left position. And that's just how it is. Well, if that's the case, then why aren't other fascist symbols treated with such impulsive revulsion? If you show an average North American person the fasces, a bundle of sticks with an axe in it, the symbol that gives fascism its name, nobody considers that offensive. The fasces has been an Italian symbol of power for thousands of years, but its most recent widespread use was in Mussolini's fascism. It gives the ideology its name. So it can't be that fascist symbols are just inherently more objectionable than communist ones. Both the fasces and the hammer and sickle are symbols based in European culture, Italian and Russian respectively, while the Nazis lifted the swastika from Asian religions. Swastika is the Indian name, while in China it's the wan, and in Japan it's the manji. It can be found on and around temples dedicated to all of the major East Asian faiths. And if you want to find a place of worship on a modern city map, just look for the swastika. Of all the symbology related to totalitarian ideologies, the swastika is both the only one commonly maligned as hateful and the only one from a non-white region of the world. You could make the argument that hatred of the swastika is, in fact, racist. But that's a troll's argument. It's pretty funny, though. Maybe you could make someone's head explode with it. It doesn't solve the problem, though, does it? Why are the communists exempted from widespread disgust? Maybe the answer is in disgust. Disgust sensitivity is a measurement of, well, how sensitive you are to disgust. Seems obvious. We have disgust reactions when we encounter something that has the potential to make us sick, like rotting food or corpses or waste products. The study Disgust Sensitivity and the Neurophysiology of Left-Right Political Orientations from 2011 shows that not only are conservatives generally easier to disgust than liberals, but that involuntary physiological responses are more pronounced when disgusted, and that different areas of the brain activate when disgusted between the two political persuasions. In other words, the more conservative you are, the more likely it is that you're going to find something disgusting. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that fascists use the term cleansing to refer to the destruction of a people, because that's quite literally what they mean. But the more radically left you go, the harder it is to disgust people. This has obvious benefits. There are things that the right sees as disgusting and therefore wants banned or removed from society that doesn't actually cause anybody any harm. Sometimes the thing you find disgusting isn't actually bad and you're just too sensitive about it. Yeah, disgust is one of the few times you can actually call conservatives overly sensitive snowflakes. But the disgust tolerance within radical lefties is so low that you often see them excusing clearly objectionable acts, like the millions of deaths that communism has caused, as no big deal. Because hey, labeling something disgusting is just a way for the man to oppress everyone, dude. The people who make those arguments, by the way, are often disgusting themselves. But they'll never figure that out because they've got such a low sensitivity to it. So maybe it's the case that the left's natural lowered disgust sensitivity allows them to more easily ignore the faults of their ideology, as well as the faults within themselves. Maybe. But I think there's something more to it. By now, we've identified the point at which the natural tendency of the right wing to promote orderly social structures and maximize productivity can go too far. The fascists have shown us that. Conservatives obviously have a point. Society needs order, it can't just all be chaos. And social structures give human beings values to enshrine and pursue in order to better themselves. When you hit the point of, say, racial purity and the destruction of the out group, then you've gone too far. And I think that's something that we all intrinsically know, which is why we react so viscerally to the swastika, without even really thinking. Because we realize that, at least in the West, the swastika is a symbol that represents the extreme right's proclivity to implement the tyranny of order. But we don't have a clear point for when the left has gone too far. There's no philosophy we can point to. There's no symbol we can easily grab to represent it. When extremists on the right go violent, mainstream conservatives are quick to denounce them. But mainstream lefties have no problem running interference for the violence of the extreme left. They won't even countenance the question of when has the left gone too far. They'll say mealy-mouthed nonsense like, oh, well, the revolutionaries have a point. They're not all wrong. They're fighting the patriarchy. Or they might even become radicalized to join the violence themselves. The left's close relationship with chaos is just as important to a functioning society as the right's close relationship with order. Just as order creates virtue and productivity, from chaos you get things like innovation and growth. Order might maintain structures, but chaos creates the structure in the first place. The right has no problem with boundaries. They're an integral part of order. But borders are poisonous to the left, because borders restrict freedom, and freedom is fundamentally the left's domain, as order's opposing force. So it's no surprise to me that conservatives have no problem with drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is the point at which we can go too far, while liberals have a much harder time differentiating between their moderates and their extremists. This is why stuff like gender fluidity or transracialism comes from radical left thought as well. If borders are oppressive and removing borders is an expression of freedom, then the boundaries between things start to become quite blurry. And that's also why stuff like racial purity comes from radical right thought, because imposing a strict border on something that naturally doesn't have one, race for example, is the conservative bread and butter. The ultimate radical left desire is the erasure of all borders everywhere. Physical borders like between nations, borders between race or gender or class. Intellectual or conceptual borders, which is what the tabula rasa theory is based on, that humans are 100% a product of their upbringing and nothing else. It's no wonder that extreme left-leaning nations descend into state worship or cults of personality, whether that's communist hellholes like Soviet Russia or modern superstates like the EU. The end goal of the ideology of communism is for it to become a deity, for all peoples of the world to live in its predicted utopia, and for the individual communists themselves to be revered as the chosen saint who returns from the mountaintop with heavenly wisdom. The radical left seeks to be God, to replace God with the state, because a thing without boundaries is simultaneously all things. When some cheeky commie says real communism has never been tried, this is what they mean conceptually, that because theoretical communism contains the nature of reality within its purview, and that nothing exists outside of it, all forms of earthly communism were doomed to failure, and that their chosen saints meant to bring about paradise were corrupted. There's also the implication that if they were given the opportunity to be the chosen saint, they could pull it off, which is laughable because these types of people can't even balance their own budget. We're not any closer to the answer to the question, though, are we? We know when the right has gone too far. Racial superiority. It's clearly demarked. On the conservative side of things, we've learned how to identify those outside of the range of acceptable political opinion. But we still don't know when the left has gone too far. We have no universally agreed upon identifier of when the left has strayed outside of the range of acceptable political opinion. And given the left's love of freedom, which is a good thing in many respects, we're still unlikely to get a straight, consistent answer from any leftists on the topic, because their philosophy precludes demarcation. In fact, we're more likely to see the left justify its own radicals, and stay silent as those radicals keep pushing the boundaries way out in crazy land. So what do? Is it just that Nazis are bad because they're racist? That arbitrary discrimination based on race is the true deciding factor in evil and not killing millions of people? Is Stalin morally superior to Hitler because his mass grave sites are multicultural? Well, that does sound like something an SJW would say, crazily enough. But I refuse to accept that conclusion. Well, I still consider myself a center-lefty. I guess it's incumbent on me to identify the pathology within my own political wing and disassociate myself with it. And if I had to put my finger on it, it would be equality of outcome. Equality of opportunity is the preferred state of humanity, and it's an invention of classical European liberalism, by the way. But equality of outcome is a doctrine soaked in blood. It states that all people should achieve the same outcomes, regardless of how much effort they put in or where they start from. Firstly, it's bad because it constitutes a race to the bottom. The hyper-competent people of society must be held back so that the lowest common denominator can keep up. Secondly, who gets to decide what the equal outcome is? Surely it would be some bureaucracy. And surely the bureaucracy would have to be massive in order to encompass all human economic activity. And I guarantee you, it would be staffed by exactly the type of people you don't want working in that position, because that's who'd be attracted to the job. And it would have to massively curtail personal freedom in order to get the job done. Thirdly, how would you fractionate the oppressed classes of society such that they get their equal outcome in your estimation? You can't just divvy it up between men and women and call it a day, for example. Once you add race, then you've got white men, white women, black men, black women, Latino men, and so on. And then when you add sexuality, you've got white gay men, white lesbian women, white straight men, white straight women, etc., etc. Every time you add a variable, the number of total combinations increases exponentially. And you want to do this, top down, for every single human on the planet, across every possible metric that one could be oppressed: race and gender and sexuality and trans status and ability and class and attractiveness and heritage and languages spoken, and every other possible thing that might make your life a bit harder than you think it should be? No way, man. This leads to tyranny and utter destruction. It's no wonder that communism collapses under a whirlwind of corruption and poverty every single fucking time it's tried. The people in charge are given unfettered power to judge your life as if they were running reality itself, because that's the job they'd rather be doing. I think it's reasonable to say that when a left-wing radical says, "I want equality of outcome," we treat it exactly like when a right-wing radical says, "I want racial superiority." I know they don't sound the same right away, but that's because chaos is generally a more complicated force than order, and freedom by necessity encompasses more total things than restriction. So it's going to be a bit messier identifying exactly where the left has gone wrong compared to the right. But those two statements are absolutely moral equivalents, just like how the swastika and the hammer and sickle are.